The street view outside the car window sped by, casting shifting, dappled shadows across Elijah's delicate yet slightly pale profile. He gripped the newly issued marriage certificate in his hand, his slender knuckles turning a fragile pale blue from the sheer exertion. In the photo, his smile was as stiff as a marionette's, while beside him, Bruce's jawline was tight as a drawn blade, refusing to offer even a perfunctory curve of the lips. Fate had played a cruel joke, permanently welding the Casey family's pampered Omega fake young master of 20 years with the alpha true young master who had suffered on the outside, the two most notorious rivals in school, with a single piece of paper. A week ago, it was discovered that Elijah was the child switched at birth in the Casey family, while Bruce was the true heir who had been left wandering outside for 2 decades. Their grandfather already looked down on Elijah for being an Omega, and upon learning the truth, he couldn't wait to kick Elijah out and bring Bruce back. Unwilling to part with Elijah but unable to persuade the old man, his parents came up with a desperate solution: have Elijah and Bruce get their marriage certificates so Elijah could legitimately stay in the Casey family. In the spacious back seat, the mottled shadows of trees carved a harsh dividing line across the leather seats. Elijah pressed himself against the cold left window, while Bruce faded into the heavy shadows on the right, the air between them practically freezing over. Bruce? Elijah swallowed hard, his dry throat bobbing as his fingertips unconsciously dug into the edge of his jacket, inching slightly toward the boundary of light and shadow. At school, could you please not tell anyone about us getting married? From the shadows, Bruce's icy gaze lightly swept over Elijah's anxiously trembling lashes. After a few seconds, those thin lips parted, tossing out a single, emotionless word: fine. On their first day back at school, the surging whispers in the hallways morphed into countless glaring cold stares. Colin from the Bart family arrogantly blocked the middle of the corridor, his malicious mockery hitting Elijah, who had plummeted from grace, like a deafening background noise. Elijah's chest heaved sharply, the corners of his eyes forced into a stubborn, thin red from the humiliation. Suppressing the slight tremble in his fingertips, he straightened his slender back. My parents haven't kicked me out, and I'm still the young master of the Casey family. Why is an outsider like you making such a fuss? What about Bruce? You took 20 years of his good life. Doesn't he resent you? Colin sneered, his face written with the cruel satisfaction of kicking someone while they were down. Just as Colin raised his voice, attempting to stomp Elijah completely into the mud, a tall shadow silently and completely enveloped Elijah. Bruce had appeared at Elijah's side at some unknown point, his starlit eyes locked dead onto Colin beneath sharp brows, spitting out words that carried the weight of inescapable domination. This is our family business. What the hell does it have to do with you? Colin's arrogant expression instantly shattered. Flushing red under the irresistible magnetism of the dark blue shadows, he cursed and fled in a panic. Astonished, Elijah turned his head, his gaze colliding with Bruce's still indifferent profile. He had thought Bruce would just stand by and watch coldly. Thinking of that aggressive protectiveness, Elijah's tense shoulders unconsciously relaxed, and he couldn't help but pull his lips into a very faint smile. Ahem. He cleared his throat to cover it up, his eyes darting toward his toes, his voice carrying an awkward softness. Bruce, thank you for speaking up for me just now. And, actually, about everything, I owe you. If you ever need anything, I'll make it up to you. The warm sun at the end of the corridor slanted down onto the soft crown of Elijah's hair. He hung his head like a helpless, guilt-ridden thief. A very soft rumble of a chest cavity suddenly sounded from above. Elijah snapped his eyes up, just in time to catch a lingering trace of amusement in Bruce's eyes, softened by the warm light. Yeah, I know. Bruce's voice lost its usual harshness, holding a trace of imperceptible indulgence. The afterglow of the setting sun dyed the living room of their new house in a healing, warm orange. To force them to bond, the elders had helped the newlyweds move in, dubbing it the joy of moving as a family. In front of the new house, Bruce had only a single, lonely old canvas bag by his side, while Elijah stood in front of a mountain of expensive, custom-made leather suitcases. Under the warm, golden light, the stark contrast looked both comical and jarring. Elijah's delicate fingers gripped the cold handle of his suitcase, letting out a faint sigh of resignation. Dragging the heavy luggage, listening to the dull scrape of the wheels against the concrete, he followed step by step behind that tall figure, walking toward an unknown life that belonged only to him and Bruce, wrapped in the sunset's glow. Elijah, his mother's gentle voice drifted from the front, backlit by the evening halo. Is the suitcase heavy? Do you want Bruce to help you? Elijah's fingertips tightened, and he quickly shook his head. No, I can do it myself. But beside him, a large, well-defined hand had already reached over without a word. Elijah subconsciously dodged to the side, but his heel abruptly stepped into a pothole. Instantly losing his balance, he cried out in alarm, falling straight backward along with the cumbersome suitcase. The expected impact with the hard ground never came. A warm, strong arm suddenly wrapped around his waist, pulling him firmly against a broad chest. In that instant, the warmth seemed to be completely siphoned from the surrounding orange sunset. A visible, pale cyan frost suddenly filled the air, fine ice crystals swirling around their embrace. It was Bruce's alpha pheromone. Elijah opened his eyes in a daze, crashing into Bruce's deep pupils, inches away. Their warm breaths mingled, Elijah's long lashes fluttered, and absurdly cliched TV drama scenes flashed through his mind. But he knew, between them, it was absolutely impossible. Can you still walk? Bruce's jawline was taut, not immediately letting go. The moment Elijah tentatively tried to move, a tearing pain in his ankle sent a rush of red to the corners of his eyes, physical tears rapidly welling up. Bruce's gaze darkened. Without a word, he scooped him up into his arms. Mom, Dad, leave the things for now. I'm taking him to the hospital. Elijah struggled uneasily in the weightless sensation of being suspended, only to be met with a hoarse warning from above. Keep moving, and you'll fall. Everything that followed was fast-forwarded. The pungent smell of disinfectant, the cold fluorescent lights of the ER, finally settling into the dull thud of Bruce, pushing a brand new wheelchair across the hardwood floor of the living room. Relieved to no longer be confined by that scorching embrace, Elijah secretly let out a breath. In the living room after dinner, a warm yellow floor lamp spilled a halo of healing light. His mother sat in the center of the sofa, pulling Elijah and Bruce's hands together and stacking them on top of each other. Elijah, Bruce, you are both our precious boys. You have to be good to each other. Bruce's large, warm palm rested on top. The unfamiliar, robust pulse of an alpha tapped against Elijah's nerves through their touching skin. Curling his stiff fingertips, Elijah pressed his lips tightly together, lowered his eyelids, and spat out a single word against his will. Okay. Elijah sprained his ankle, so in his daily life, ill help. Bruce's deep voice cut through his mother's worries without hesitation. His mother's eyes crinkled into a smile. Then it's going to be tough on our precious Bruce to take care of our precious Elijah. Hearing those pet names, Elijah looked up in astonishment, his gaze sweeping over Bruce's stern face before he couldn't help but turn his head away, his shoulders shaking with secret laughter. Bruce helplessly pinched the bridge of his nose, muttering a low "mom," but didn't pull his hand away. Under the glowing light, at first glance, the scene really did look like the most ordinary, happiest family of four. As the front door clicked locked and their parents completely left, the warm filter in the air instantly shattered. The once diametrically opposed rivals were now bound under the same roof. Elijah was so awkward his toes curled in his shoes. Propping himself up on the armrest, he stood and hopped toward the master bedroom on one foot like a rabbit. What are you doing? Bruce's flat voice came from behind. I'm taking a shower. A long, dead silence fell behind him. Elijah could even feel that sharp gaze staring fixedly at his ankle. I just sprained my ankle. My leg isn't crippled. I can still wash myself. Elijah gritted his teeth, not looking back. Bruce didn't argue further. A few minutes later, 2 sturdy non-slip stools appeared in the bathroom, and the sprained ankle was meticulously wrapped in a waterproof layer. When Elijah pushed open the bathroom door, dripping with steam, the light in the guest room was already on. Bruce had put his old canvas bag in the guest room. Shouldn't I be sleeping in the guest room? Elijah leaned on the doorframe on one foot, raising an eyebrow in confusion. Bruce's gaze swept over the mountain of suitcases behind him. You have too much stuff. It's hard to move. A few days later, on the campus tree-lined avenue, sunlight streamed through the gaps in the leaves. Bruce pushed Elijah in his wheelchair, navigating through countless shocked, probing stares. Amid the shifting light and shadow, countless translucent virtual form pop-ups refreshed frantically in the air around them, scrolling rapidly, every word morphing into invisible blades. Shocking. Former rivals suspected to be dating. Dating? It's definitely Elijah's scheme to stay in the Casey family. Enemies to lovers? I'm here for it. Insider info says they already got their certificate and moved in together. Elijah has no shame, using every trick in the book to cling to the real young master. The glaring texts flashed alternately in mid-air. Elijah gripped the wheelchair armrests tightly, his knuckles pale. Pushing the wheelchair, Bruce's face was as calm as deep water. Staring straight ahead, his hand steadily controlled the wheelchair's direction, pushing him forward amidst the uproar and criticism. On Elijah's phone screen, the harsh forum comments rolled wildly like a waterfall. The cold, white light cast a fragile shadow on his lowered eyelashes. Frustrated, he pressed the lock button. The screen went pitch black, completely shutting out those humiliating speculations. Bruce, this wheelchair is electric. I can steer it myself. Elijah's fingers clamped onto the joystick, a sickly paleness spreading over his knuckles from the sheer exertion. The slight crunch of wheels rolling over fallen leaves came from behind. Bruce's tall frame pushed the chair, his broad palms pressing firmly on the handles. The warm afternoon sun peeked through the trees, plating a soft golden edge on his stern profile. I promised Mom I'd take care of you. Elijah bit his lower lip hard, a hint of mockery flashing in his eyes. It was just a show to fool the elders. Suddenly, the wheelchair stopped gliding in a secluded, empty corner. Sunlight poured down unimpeded, cloaking them in a warm, healing orange halo. What are you doing? Elijah cautiously raised his chin, like a hedgehog bristling with spikes. Bruce stepped around to his front, his tall shadow instantly engulfing Elijah. He leaned in slightly, those deep, usually unruffled eyes now locking dead onto Elijah's dodging gaze. Elijah, why do you hate me so much? Actually, Elijah had fallen for Bruce the very first time they met. It was the beginning of their freshman year. Elijah had accidentally knocked over his tray in the cafeteria, the warm soup seeping into a glaring stain on the Alpha's pristine white shirt. Elijah's flustered, apologizing face was illuminated by the sun, and that was how they met. After that, Elijah was always showing up around Bruce. Late at night, on the warm bed in his dorm, Elijah bundled himself tightly in his blanket. The faint blue light of his phone screen illuminated his uncontrollably upturned lips as he secretly read posts shipping them together, his flushed cheeks radiating the vivid, fluttering heartbeat unique to youth. Until that twilight, when the light in the corner of the corridor was sliced into cold, slanted shadows by the dusk. From afar, Elijah heard a roommate ask Bruce, "That cute Omega asked for your number yesterday. Why did you just reject him?" "I don't like Omegas. It's a dual psychological and physiological aversion. I'll probably find a like-minded beta in the future." Bruce's cold voice pierced the hallway air, stabbing straight into Elijah's ears as he hid behind the wall. "What about Elijah?" The roommate's pressing question made the air slightly stagnate. After a brief silence came Bruce's emotionless repetition. "I'll find a like-minded beta in the future." Elijah leaned his back against the rough wall, the light in his eyes dying out bit by bit. The secret leaps of joy that had lit up his screen late at night instantly shattered into a pathetic joke. That night, under the most popular ship thread, red-eyed Elijah slammed his fingertips against the screen, leaving a decisive reply. "I have nothing to do with him. I hate him." From then on, Elijah's one-sided provocations and glaring hostility forged 3 years of explosive yet deeply intertwined history between them. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, violently snapping Elijah back from the whirlpool of memories. Faced with Bruce's blunt interrogation, Elijah's chest heaved sharply. He turned his head, stubbornly avoiding that burning gaze. "Hate is just hate. There aren't that many reasons." He muttered softly, his long lashes trembling uneasily, a trace of imperceptible grievance bleeding into his voice. "Besides, you were clearly the one who hated me first." "What did you say?" Bruce furrowed his brows slightly, his tall frame pressing half an inch closer in inescapable domination. "Nothing." Elijah slammed his hand against the wheelchair's armrest with a sharp snap. His emotions were like a lit fuse, a thin redness instantly forced to the corners of his eyes. "If you're not going to push, let me do it myself. If you weren't following me around all day, would our relationship have been exposed this quickly? Making me face everyone's gossip so early?" As Elijah's emotions spiraled, the air around them twisted subtly. Amidst the warm natural light, a visible layer of pale cyan frost suddenly flared up. As the sunlight pierced the frost, it refracted into a shattered, crystalline shimmer. It was Bruce's alpha pheromone. Sensing the Omega's emotional turmoil, The visual anomaly of light and shadow spilled out unconsciously, carrying an intensely soothing magnetism. What gossip? Bruce's eyes were glued to his reddened rims, his voice hoarse. The school forum? Whatever. Elijah slumped back into his chair in resignation, pulling a sarcastic smirk to hide his vulnerability with sharpness. What do you know? After all, everyone is just pitying you right now. The faint sound of crushing leaves behind the wheelchair came to an abrupt halt. Elijah turned his head in confusion. Under the dappled tree shadows, Bruce's tall body stood still as a statue. Those deep eyes, usually devoid of ripples, were now locked onto his phone screen, his sharp brows knitted tightly, casting a harsh shadow. A moment later, Bruce turned off the screen, dropping his gaze to meet Elijah's eyes squarely. The tone isn't right. What isn't right? There is too much malicious speculation aimed at you. It's abnormal. Bruce's voice was low, carrying unquestionable certainty. You haven't made enemies at school. Most people would just enjoy the drama. They wouldn't have such uniform malice. Someone is definitely orchestrating this. Elijah froze. Malicious speculation. He unconsciously picked at the wheelchair's armrest. Every word of it was a bone-chilling fact that even he couldn't refute, yet Bruce hadn't hesitated to label it malice. Before Elijah could sort out his thoughts, a strange change occurred in the surrounding air. The pale cyan frost that had been suspended defensively in midair due to their emotional fluctuations quietly melted. They morphed into a visible, incredibly soft band of auroras. Like a warm tide, it flowed slowly along the contours of the wheelchair, finally wrapping around Elijah's slender shoulders carefully and comfortingly. Along with this gentle visual phenomenon, Bruce's husky voice sounded from above, carrying an incredibly rare trace of apology. I'm sorry you had to suffer this grievance because of me. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. Elijah's pupils dilated slightly, his Adam's apple bobbing dryly. Staring fixedly at that soft swath of cyan aurora, his mind went blank for a second, ultimately only managing to squeeze 2 dry words through his teeth: suit yourself. Little did Elijah know that the take care of it Bruce spoke of was a reckless act of self-sacrifice. In the dimly lit dorm, the cold blue glow of his phone screen illuminated Elijah's astonished face. On the screen, that top trending thread had been publicly liked and forwarded by Bruce's official account. Why not? Haven't you heard that enemies make the best wives? Maybe Bruce has been secretly in love with Elijah all along, and after getting his identity back, he couldn't bear to see him suffer, so they just got together. Elijah gasped sharply, his fingers trembling so hard he almost dropped the phone on his face. To quell the storm, Bruce was actually willing to start such an absurd rumor about himself. The twilight in the corridor corner from their freshman year resurfaced in his mind, Bruce's icy dual psychological and physiological aversion still echoing in his ears. Elijah bit his lower lip hard, forcefully suppressing that uncontrollable flutter in his eyes. He was just putting on an act to save face for the Casey family. A few days later, amidst the noise of the cafeteria, his beta friend Gino carried a tray and sat unceremoniously across from Elijah. Did you really get married to Bruce? Gino's eyes flickered behind his glasses. But didn't he say he loathes omegas and wanted to find a beta? Elijah stirred the hot soup in his bowl, the metal spoon clinking against the porcelain with a crisp sound. Looking up, he pulled a flawless smile. Yeah, I guess my charm was just too much, and it changed his mind. I see. Gino pushed his glasses up, a barely detectable stiffness in his tone. Well, congratulations. You have to invite me to the wedding. Right then, a highly oppressive, tall shadow loomed from behind. Bruce stood expressionlessly by the table, holding his tray. Gino, who had wanted to fish for more info, instantly fell silent, lowering his head to shovel food into his mouth. Elijah quietly observed the two, ultimately burying the weird intuition that arose in his heart. Half a month later, at the Casey family manor, a massive crystal chandelier refracted blinding, brilliant golden light. In the extravagant hall for their grandfather's 70th birthday banquet, dressed-up guests mingled amid clinking glasses. Dressed in a perfectly tailored, pure white haute couture suit, Elijah stood quietly beside Bruce. Their grandfather, who usually scowled at him, was now holding a glass of red wine, looking at them with a face full of amiable smiles. Feeling slightly suffocated, Elijah found an excuse and slipped into the crowd. Looking through the overlapping wine glasses, he keenly caught sight of a figure who shouldn't be there. Gino? What are you doing here? Elijah walked over and patted his shoulder. Gino spun around, a flash of panic crossing his face before he forced a surprised expression. Elijah! I came with Duke. Hearing the name of that notoriously decadent playboy, Elijah frowned. Just as he opened his mouth to warn him against it, Gino stiffly looked away, forcefully changing the subject. Just as the atmosphere between them grew slightly stagnant, a waiter rushing by with a tray passed them. Crash! The goblet tipped over, and the dark red liquid spilled like striking color onto the chest of Gino's pristine white shirt. The crimson stain quickly bloomed and expanded under the lights, like a decaying rose, exuding a sickly sweet and rotten scent of alcohol. Gino's face instantly went pale. He gritted his teeth, pressing tissues hard against the stain to wipe it off, his knuckles turning pale blue from the exertion. Stop wiping. This shirt is ruined. Elijah pressed down on Gino's trembling wrist, his gaze sweeping over the mess. Let's go. I'll take you upstairs to change. The heavy oak door of the second-floor guest room let out a dull click. Elijah pointed to a bathroom at random. You change in there. I'll wait. The cold light of his phone screen hit Elijah's defenseless face. In the next second, the door hinges let out an ear-piercing scrape. Colin strode into the room, arms crossed, chin held high, his eyes full of undisguised malice. Elijah abruptly stood up, his spine suddenly taut, a flash of wariness in his eyes. Colin, what are you doing here? Right when Elijah's attention was completely diverted, a dark silhouette slipped silently along the base of the wall right behind him. A rough hemp rope, wielding an inescapable power, violently cinched around Elijah's wrists. Astonished, Elijah turned his head, his gaze meeting a pair of red-rimmed eyes. Gino was grinding his molars, his knuckles turning a bone-chilling white as he yanked the dead knot tight. Gino, you're with him? Struggling under absolute domination was pointless. Colin lunged forward like a starved wolf. With a despairing thud, Elijah was pinned dead against the cold marble floor. A rough towel was shoved brutally into his mouth, blocking off any cries for help. Towering over him, Colin picked up Elijah's phone and tossed it at Gino's feet. Use his phone to text Bruce. Say he wasn't feeling well and went home early. That way Bruce won't get suspicious. The chill of the marble pierced through his clothes, seeping into his bones. Elijah painfully closed his eyes, heavy shadows swallowing him whole as his heartbeat drummed wildly in his eardrums. Elijah, you really are a stray dog. Even the guy you thought was your best friend is working with me to ruin you. Colin's mockery echoed in the empty room. Gino expertly hit send, the blue light of the screen illuminating his facial muscles twisted by extreme jealousy. He crouched down, glaring dead into Elijah's eyes with a gaze like a poisoned blade. You must be wondering why I helped tie you up, right? Even though you were so good to me, even funded me, I still betrayed you. Elijah, I never needed your high and mighty charity. Gino's chest heaved violently, his features practically contorted together. Do you know how thrilled I was? That Bruce, who only wanted a beta, turned out to be the eldest young master of the Casey family. What does that mean? It means an ordinary beta like me had a chance to cross that threshold and become his partner. But what gave you the right? You, a fake young master occupying the magpie's nest, and Omega, what right did you have to ruin my path with a single marriage certificate? A faint, muffled groan escaped Elijah's blocked mouth, extreme absurdity and speechlessness flashing in his eyes. Even if Bruce wanted a beta, Gino was just an ordinary beta. With no powerful background and no outstanding skills, what made him think he could win the favor of Bruce and the Casey family out of all the betas? Did he really think eliminating him would make for an easy rise to the top? What absolute delusional nonsense. Colin also seemed to grow annoyed by this crazed monologue. He glanced impatiently at his watch. All right, leave him here. Well, come back and untie him after the banquet is over. Untie him? Gino didn't look back. His gaze slowly drifted downward, locking dead onto the back of Elijah's neck. You haven't been marked by Bruce yet, have you? Elijah's pupils shrank drastically, his long lashes trembling violently. Even though a few wisps of Bruce's highly territorial, pale cyan protective light were still faintly swirling around his collar, it wasn't a true, permanent mark. Without a mark, it meant any alpha could completely destroy him in this moment. His intense struggle caused the rough ropes to leave glaring red welts. Gino sneered, pulling a syringe filled with pink liquid from his pocket, and plunged it into Elijah's slender forearm without hesitation. The second the cold liquid was pushed into his veins bulged sharply on the side of Elijah's neck. "What did you inject him with?" Colin panicked, lunging forward and grabbing Gino's wrist. "Heat inducer." Gino slowly pulled out the needle, the muscles around his mouth twitching eerily. "Don't you hate him too? What are you getting worked up about?" "But I didn't know you were going to use such a dirty trick." Colin backed away in terror, his face deathly pale. Too late. Gino stood up, his glasses refracting a cold glint under the dim light. "You're an accomplice now. Duke will be coming up soon." The drug took effect violently, and Elijah's world began to collapse. A visible, cloyingly sweet, and viscous crimson aura began to steam uncontrollably from all over Elijah's body. It was the Omega instinct being forcibly induced. A high fever boiled away Elijah's last shred of reason. He clenched his jaw, physiological tears completely blurring his vision. Right before he plunged entirely into that crimson abyss of despair, Gino's demon-like whisper exploded in his ear. "Elijah, Duke might be a player, but for a mediocre Omega like you, has more than enough." Elijah curled up on the floor, an unnatural flush spreading across his fair skin, with only one desperate thought left in his mind. If he were to be marked by a scum like Duke, he would rather die. Just as this crimson mist was about to swallow everything, a sudden dark shadow crashed through the aura. "You're crazy. I hate being threatened." Colin flushed red, shoving Gino away forcefully. With a dull thud, the back of Gino's head struck the sharp corner of the bed, and he slumped down limply like a broken marionette. Still in shock, Colin checked his breathing, confirming he wasn't dead. He clumsily untied the hemp ropes that had dug red welts into Elijah's wrists. "Elijah? Hey." Pinching his nose, Colin looked at the room practically dripping with the crimson aura, turning pale as he pulled out a suppressant and jabbed it hard into Elijah's arm. "Did you think I was as rotten as Gino? I hate you, sure, but I only kick people when they're down fair and square. I just helped Gino tie you up to scare you. I wouldn't stoop to this dirty level. No, your pheromone is too strong. The suppressant isn't holding it down." The cold medicine pushed into his body was like a clay ox entering the sea. It didn't make a single ripple. Elijah bit his tongue hard, the metallic sweetness of it buying him a fleeting moment of clarity. He gripped the hem of Colin's shirt tightly, his fingertips trembling. "Hide me. Next door. Go find Bruce." Before the words could fully fall, that crimson tide of desire completely stripped away his final consciousness. In the boundless, searing heat, Elijah could only dig his nails fiercely into his own forearms, trying to use the pain to fight off the tidal wave drowning him. Suddenly, the viscous crimson aura wrapping him tight was brutally ripped apart from the outside by an overwhelmingly tyrannical, icy power. A massive spread of visible, ice-blue frost exploded in the air. Fine ice crystals condensed rapidly, clashing violently with the crimson heat waves with faint sizzles. A broad embrace carrying a piercing coldness caught Elijah's boiling body tightly. "I'm sorry, I'm late." Bruce's incredibly hoarse voice rang in his ear. Like a drowning man catching a piece of driftwood, Elijah locked his slender arms tightly around Bruce's neck, forcefully pressing that hard head toward his own fragile nape, which was radiating a faint crimson glow. "Bruce, I feel so terrible, help me." Bruce's jawline snapped into a cold, hard line, veins bulging on his temples. The ice-blue frost in the air trembled violently, clearly suppressing the alpha's savage instincts to the absolute limit. "Hold on a little longer. The doctor will be here soon. Why won't you mark me? Aren't I your Omega?" A heavy crimson hue was forced to the corners of Elijah's eyes, and scalding teardrops smashed against the back of Bruce's tense hand. He completely forgot all about that so-called aversion, baring his fangs like a cornered little beast and making a vicious threat. "If you won't, then let me go. I'll go find another alpha." The words "another alpha" instantly snapped the final string of reason in Bruce's mind. Bruce's pupils contracted sharply, a terrifying undercurrent surging in his eyes. With an stance of inescapable domination, his tall shadow crashed down, his sharp canines piercing into that gland, radiating a tantalizing red glow without any hesitation. Boom! In the room, the viscous crimson aura and the freezing ice-blue frost slammed into each other. The two completely opposite pheromones intertwined desperately, tearing into each other wildly in the confined space. Ultimately, in this storm of ultimate sensation, ice and fire gradually blended, morphing into an incredibly gentle, healing pale golden aurora that completely swallowed the embracing pair. When he opened his eyes again, his vision was filled with the familiar ceiling of his bedroom. The warm morning sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, casting soft, warm golden spots on the hardwood floor. Beside the bed, the concerned faces of his parents and Bruce came into view. "I'm fine now." Feeling somewhat constrained, Elijah tugged at the corner of the quilt, his gaze frantically avoiding Bruce. His nose seemed to still hold the lingering scent of that pale gold, woven from frost and heat, and the hidden bite mark on his gland was burning faintly, burning so much he didn't dare look at the alpha. Bruce gave him a deep look and didn't speak, simply and considerately pulling his father to the kitchen to prepare food, leaving the room to the mother and son. Once the door clicked shut, Elijah stared at the light spots in the air, finally unable to hold back his soft question. "Mom, Bruce obviously loathes Omegas, so why was he willing to get married to me?" "Loathes you?" His mother's hand paused while pouring water. She turned around, eyes filled with surprise. "You little fool, he was the one who proposed getting the certificate to us." Elijah bolted upright from his pillows, his pupils shaking slightly. "He proposed it? I thought you guys pushed him to do it. If even one of you didn't want to, we would never force it." His mother sat on the edge of the bed, the soft light falling on her red rims. She remained silent for a long time before slowly uncovering that sealed scar. After Bruce presented as an alpha at 10 years old, he was once adopted by an Omega. Nobody expected that the Omega was deeply psychologically unstable. As his mother recounted the story, the sunlight before Elijah's eyes seemed to instantly lose its warmth. Though nothing happened, that experience completely destroyed his perception of Omegas. That's why he has such psychological trauma. A deathly silence fell over the bedroom. Elijah's delicate fingertips gripped the pure white duvet cover tightly, kneading deep creases into the fabric. His shoulders trembled slightly as heavy self-blame surged into his eyes like a tide. "I'm sorry. If I hadn't taken his place, if he had grown up in the Casey family, he never would have gone through any of that." The sunlight fell quietly on the lowered crown of Elijah's head. That heavy guilt dissolved into silent teardrops in this healing, warm light. The sunlight crossed the window lattice, carving gentle light and shadow over the pure white quilt. Bruce set up a small tray table at the head of the bed. The warm white porridge gave off curling steam. After the meal, his parents considerately closed the door and left, leaving only the sound of their overlapping breaths in the bedroom. Elijah lowered his eyelashes, his fingertips unconsciously picking at the soft corner of the quilt, his dry throat bobbing. "I'm sorry. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have gone through those things." Bruce paused his movements of clearing the dishes. He looked up, and those eyes that had always been as deep and cold as a frozen pool were now surging with incredibly gentle undercurrents. "Even though I was only 5 at the time, I remember that Mom and Dad treated me really well. And I'm very glad." "Glad about what?" Elijah raised his eyes in astonishment. Bruce's gaze unabashedly traced the contours of Elijah's face, his voice deep and certain. If it had been an Omega wandering out in the foster system, they might have encountered far worse things. Furthermore, only the Casey family could raise the Omega I like. It was as if a spark had been abruptly tossed into the air. A massive, vibrant flush instantly spread across the tips of Elijah's fair ears. He looked away in a panic, forcing a bold front to strike back. "But you said before that you were going to find a like-minded beta." As soon as the words fell, Bruce's lean back suddenly stiffened, his deep pupils shrinking drastically in the light and shadow. In his micro-expressions, that year-round facade of coldness cracked inch by inch. "You heard that?" Bruce's jawline tightened, his voice carrying a trace of imperceptible chagrin. "I didn't understand my own feelings at the time. If I had known you were there, I wouldn't have said those words even if it killed me." So, that 3-year-long, fiery rivalry had just been an absurd misunderstanding all along. "So you've liked me all along. Why didn't you say so earlier?" Elijah's eyes went wide. Bruce pulled a bitter smile, a flash of self-deprecation in his eyes. "I thought you hated me." Elijah was speechless. "Then how are you so sure I don't hate you now?" "You let me mark you. Doesn't that mean you like me?" Bruce asked in return, his stern face actually showing a highly uncharacteristic trace of helplessness. Elijah rolled an entirely non-threatening eye, the residual flush at the corners of his eyes still unfaded. "Not necessarily. Even if I did truly hate you, wouldn't you still pursue me? You want to snatch me up without even chasing me first? Keep dreaming." Bruce's sharp brows furrowed slightly, genuine confusion appearing on his face. Haven't I been pursuing you this whole time? The air went dead for 3 seconds. Thinking back to their inseparable state in the wheelchair over the past few days, Elijah froze. Then, unable to hold back, he clutched his stomach and collapsed into the soft pillows, bursting into laughter. Watching his vivid, lively smile in the sunlight, the corners of Bruce's mouth also curled into a smile completely stripped of its defenses. Their laughter intertwined in the warm bedroom, like two fools finally freed from their chains. After the laughter died down, Elijah's fingertips gently brushed the back of his neck. The pale golden light woven with frost and heat that had lingered around his gland was gradually dimming. The phantom of the temporary mark was about to dissipate. As his body temperature rose slightly, a thin, intensely alluring crimson aura quietly bloomed in the air once again. My actual heat is almost here. I was going to keep using suppressants, but it looks like I won't need to anymore. Elijah looked up with glistening eyes, staring straight into Bruce's eyes, the end of his sentence trailing up slightly. Do you want to take some time off with me? Boom! The remaining frost in the air instantly melted, transforming into a sky full of incredibly gorgeous, dazzling, warm golden auroras. Bruce's eyes were astonishingly bright in that moment, like a fierce beast locking onto its prey, yet desperately restraining the ultimate tenderness. His Adam's apple bobbed heavily, and he said hoarsely, "Yes." The cold iron bars sliced through the pale daylight. In a dark corner, Gino and Duke, wearing prison uniforms, lowered their heads in despair. Those masterminds who had stirred up the storm on the forum were ultimately sent into the abyss by Bruce's absolute, inescapable domination. Meanwhile, in the extravagant drawing room of the Casey family, Colin bowed stiffly, the coffee table covered with partnership proposals surrendering half of the Bart family's profits. Although the look he gave Elijah was still awkward, the entire storm had completely settled. The afternoon sun lit up the hallway completely. As the last batch of guests left, the front door clicked locked. Disgusted, Elijah pulled off his restrictive formal jacket, stepping barefoot onto the warm hardwood floor. Looking at the tall figure ahead rolling up his shirt sleeves, a bright flash of slyness crossed his eyes. 2 steps back, a running start, and a leap. Like a graceful bird, Elijah threw himself onto Bruce's broad, sturdy back, his slender arms wrapping incredibly naturally and tightly around the alpha's neck. Bruce swayed slightly under the sudden weight, but instantly and instinctively reached back to hook his arms under his knees, catching him securely. Charge, charge. Elijah's warm breath brushed against Bruce's ear, his laughter blooming completely in the sunlit room. Target, the kitchen.
And that's where our story ends. Bruce's character completely won me over. On the surface, he seems like an unthawable iceberg, but in reality has always been watching over and protecting Elijah. From that aggressively protective "what the hell does it have to do with you" to instinctively catching Elijah when he sprained his ankle, and even willingly starting rumors about himself on the school forum just to shut down the gossip, he is absolutely a hopeless romantic, hidden beneath a cold exterior. Elijah, on the other hand, is incredibly honest. He openly admits his selfish desire to stay with the family and carries a deeply genuine guilt for taking over 20 years of Bruce's life. He is like a sincere, radiant little ray of sunshine. No wonder Bruce fell for him so early on. Aside from the 2 main characters, I also really love Colin. Despite being sharp-tongued and arrogant, Colin has his own bottom line and refuses to stoop to dirty tricks to ruin a fellow Omega. His distinct personality makes him truly shine. Watching them untangle all their misunderstandings, drop their defenses, and leave their past traumas behind brings such a heartwarming, healing sense of closure. It truly leaves you feeling all warm and fuzzy inside. That wraps up today's video. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next story.